Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate your participation. I'm Dr. Erin Chaparro, a research associate at the University of Oregon Center on Teaching and Learning, and I will be your presenter today as we bring you our final webinar in our series this year. In this presentation, we'll focus on making the most of your data with DDS Data System Reports. I want to make sure that you are all aware of our clearinghouse page for the DDS Next recommended goals. The web address is listed at the bottom of the screen. The page is also accessible from the Training tab and then under DDS Goals. This page includes links to all of the information about the recommended goals, including what they are, all associated technical reports, videos and recorded webinars from our training series, as well as question and answer documents from prior webinars. After each webinar, we post a link to the recorded version, a copy of the presentation slides, as well as a question and answer document from this session. We learned from our prior webinars that we won't have enough time to address all of your questions within this hour, so we will post answers to any questions we're not able to get to, as well as for all frequently asked questions that come in throughout the presentation. Our participants last time asked a lot of great questions, so make sure you check out the Q&A form from the last webinar, as it's a great resource for learning more about the recommended goals. Our goals for today are to provide you with an in-depth overview of the DDS Data System's new reports page. I'll show you how to use the new feature called My Favorite Report. And lastly, I'll walk you through the Summary of Effectiveness report. The DDS Data System and the reports it provides are essential to help you adjust or reallocate resources that you have available at your district, school, and classroom. You ask different types of questions about student performance or progress at different times of year. At the beginning of the year, for example, we want to know what % of those students are likely to need intensive, strategic, and core support. Based on those proportions, you make decisions about the different levels of support to offer. DDS reports can help answer these resource allocation decisions. In the middle of the year, a key decision is to check in on any additional students who may be at risk, as well as follow up with those groups that are receiving some extra support. The student progress monitoring graph in particular are especially helpful to look at. And at the end of the year, you and your team will want to see how well your plan worked. And so you can look at the Summary of Effectiveness report that we'll talk about today, or the cross your box plot, which is shown here. Now it's time for a poll question. Take a moment to tell us which report you use most often to look at student growth data over time. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand screen, in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, a poll will be posted. Okay, I'm not seeing the poll, so, oh, there it is. The poll just started. So which DDS report do you use most often to look at student growth data over time? A, class progress report, B, student history, C, summary of effectiveness that we'll talk about today, D, progress monitoring, and that can either be class level or individual student level, E, the individual student performance profile, or F, other. Take just another few seconds. Okay, great. Let's end the poll, and in just a few more seconds, you'll be able to see the results of our poll. Now, there are quite a few other reports on the DDS data system that I'm sure you're all aware of, but I just listed the ones here that are particular to student growth data. Okay, here are the results of our poll. we can see that the majority of people are using the class progress graph. Okay, great. Many of you are using other graphs, but you are also using individual students' performance profiles, which I love especially, and you can share that with parents as well. And then the progress monitoring graph. And just what I suspected, that summary of effectiveness report is not being used very often. So we want to make sure that you have all the information you need in order to use all the tools available to you on the DIBELS data system. So there are a number of reports available in the DIBELS data system to help you examine student performance on the critical components of early literacy. Over the course of this academic year, we've conducted several different surveys, and your feedback led us to make changes that I'm about to share with you. Now I'm going to share my desktop with you and walk you through the new reports page. Okay, welcome to the UO DIBELS Data System homepage. I'm going to provide my username and password to log in. And then I simply click the login button. Here's our personalized logged in homepage. First, I'd like to highlight the personal preferences feature. Click here on Set Personal Preferences. Oh, and I wanted to mention that if you did want to open up another internet browser window to have along the side, you can follow along with me. So the first thing is to click on Set Personal Preferences. We've provided instructions for you on how to think about using the Personal Preferences feature. This feature provides you with a default setting for how the need for support for students will be determined within your reports. Read the instructions and be sure to make a universal decision. Preferably, this decision is made at the district level, but it can also be made at the school level. You can see from the drop-down menu here, I can select former goals, recommended goals, or no preference. I'm going to click on recommended goals, and then I will click Save. You can see here that it says that my preferences has been saved. Now I'm going to go back to my home page by clicking on the Home tab. Note that throughout the year, we post messages to you about the DIBELS data system and new tools or features that we've added. You can see that this DDS message is dated May 1st. It announced the new reports page, the My Favorite Reports feature, and an update to the Webinar 2 page. Before I move on to tell you about the reports page and the My Favorite Reports, I want to point out that from time to time we place customer satisfaction surveys right here, and sometimes research surveys right on this home page. The current survey is brief, and it's an important data source that we're using to make decisions about the DDS. Another feature that I'll show you in a minute is the My Favorite Reports button that will allow you to skip many steps in the report building process. So I'm excited to show you that. But first, let's go to the Reports tab. Simply click here. One note here for you is that you don't have to log in to see the reports page. The unlogged in view provides descriptions and PDF examples of all reports. The logged in view, in addition to the descriptions and PDF examples, takes you directly to build the reports. You can either click on the name of the report, or you can click on the blue button for the PDF report, or for the web report, depending on which report you want to generate. When you first click on this Reports tab, you'll see the full list of all the available reports, and I'll scroll down just to give you a sample. They're all listed in alphabetical order and by scope. And you can see that if you scroll down to the bottom, there are a lot of reports. So how do you choose the right one to help you answer the question at hand? This reports page and the filter feature will help you to find the right report. If you look at the top two reports, we've got the combined PDF and the cross-year box plot. I'll point out some features of the new reports page. Let's look at cross-year box plot. If this is a new report for you and you'd like to know more, the first thing you can do is click on the icon for the report. Every example includes a brief description, a few questions that this report can help you answer, PDF examples of the reports for the recommended goals, the former goals, and DDS 6. If we have these reports for Easy CBM and EDEL, then the PDF example will also be listed here. Click the X in the upper right-hand corner to exit this view and to return to the full view of the reports page. Remember, if you're logged in, you'll see blue squares that indicate the format of the reports available. They'll indicate either web format, PDF format, or both. Now, I want to show you how to use our handy set of filters that are off to the right of your screen. We have 4 filters available for you to find the right report. You can filter by assessment, by scope, by data type, or by question. Most of you are at the end of the school year, which is a popular time to generate reports. So let's say that I'm interested in looking at an Easy CBM math report. I want to look at that report for the school level. I'm also going to click Universal Screening here by data type. And then which question should I click? How about the how many students meet the goal? You can see that we have a range of questions. How many students meet the goals? How much growth has there been? How many students have data entered? And how do I export data from the system? So now that I've selected my filters, I actually have to go up and click on the blue filter button. You can see that the reports that meet the filter criteria come up. So the grade list and the summary report came up. From here, you can click on the information found at the icon if you want to learn a little bit more. Or you can generate the report directly by clicking on the name, or the actual format. Let's use the filter one more time. This time, I'm interested in looking at DDS data, and I have to click off Easy CBM Math. I'm also interested in looking at universal screening benchmark data, so I don't have to change anything there. But I'm also interested in looking at how much growth has there been. So I'm going to click that box and click off the box next to the previous question. Once again, I'll click on the filter button. So here are the reports that meet that criteria. Today, I'm interested in looking at the Summary of Effectiveness report. So I'm going to click on that report name. From the drop-down menu, I'll select school level. And the school year that I'm interested in is already listed there. I'll click Continue. And then I'll select the school that I'm interested in. And this is because I have a district level account. And the assessment, which is DDS Next. And I've defaulted to recommended goals, so that's what comes up first. Click Continue. And now I select the step that I'm interested in. Let's look at the beginning of 2nd grade to the end of 2nd grade. Click Continue. And now I've generated my report. I'll download that PDF file. And you should now see the PDF of the Summary of Effectiveness by school for Walnut Elementary in front of you. In order to download that report, you hover at the bottom of your screen and click on the icon to save it to your computer. Now I'm going to go back to my reports. If this is a report that you know you will want to generate again, then you can click on the My Favorite Reports tab. A title is already suggested for you, but I recommend changing it to something that will trigger your memory. So I'm going to call it SOE for Summary of Effectiveness, Walnut for the school, second grade, and BOY for beginning of year to EOY, which is end of year, and all save. Now, if I click on my favorite reports link again, you can actually manage some of your reports right here. You can delete a report in this pop-up window, or you can click on Manage My Favorite Reports. At Manage My Favorite Reports, you can sort by alphabetical order, by the most used report, the most recent report, or the report type. If you want to delete a report from your favorites list, simply click on the box Delete with the question mark and click one of the red buttons. If you can't remember everything that we've just walked through when you go to do this on your own, you can always just scroll down the page to find brief instructions on creating, using, and managing My Favorite Reports. Now, remember that button over on the home page? Let's go take a look. I click on Home, click on My Favorite Report. My two favorite reports come up, and I'm going to click on the Summary of Effectiveness District, second grade, middle of year to end of year. And it takes me directly to that report, so I don't have to go through all of the drop-down menus again. What a great time saver, right? Now, if you have this report saved, it will populate any new data that you have entered in there. So it won't save just that report at that one moment in time. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed seeing the reports feature and My Favorite Reports as much as we've appreciated creating it to make your lives a little bit easier. Now I'm going to stop sharing my desktop and we'll go back to our presentation. Now let's talk about the Summary of Effectiveness report. There are 3 levels to the Summary of Effectiveness report: the class, the school, and the district level. This should look familiar if you've joined us on one of our webinars before. So before we get into looking at some specific reports and examples of how to think about the Summary of Effectiveness report in particular, I want to remind you of the link between recommended data use in schools and a procedural model to guide the data use process. The problem-solving process begins by identifying a need for support in a very specific way. Whoops, moved ahead there. Identifying and validating the need for support in a very specific way. And then validating is actually the place where we need to look for support for any students where chance poor performance may be responsible for an unexpected test result. It is only after these first 2 steps are completed that we consider making instructional design and placement changes for students. It is at this point where we have the chance to consider the best use of our available resources so that teachers can do their best teaching and students can do their best learning. Once you've begun to implement the plan, it's always critical to evaluate whether the plan worked or not. At times, the data may show you that the plan was effective for some students, but not all students. Today, with the Summary of Effectiveness report, we'll really be focusing on the final step, which is evaluate the plan. Here you can see how the problem-solving model describes the types of decisions we're making throughout the school year. At the beginning of the year, we actually look at how all of our students are doing. We can do this by looking at, for example, a class list. At the middle of the year, it's helpful to look at other reports like the Progress Monitoring Report. And at the end of the year, we can look at cross-year box plots, or like we're going to look at today, the Summary of Effectiveness report. The types of questions we have about student performance or progress are different at different times of year. In particular, the Summary of Effectiveness, or SOE, report can be generated for 3 different times per year. The first step is the beginning to the middle of the school year. The second step is the middle to the end of the school year. And the third step is from the beginning to the end of the school year. In particular, the Summary of Effectiveness report helps us to answer systems-level questions. In particular, how effective are our instructional supports for all students? And are students in each of these groups making adequate progress? Are we moving students from at-risk to some or low risk? Are we moving students from some risk to low risk? And are we maintaining those students at low risk? So let's look at the class level of the Summary of Effectiveness report. The Summary of Effectiveness reports are available in the winter and spring of each year, and they can be used to evaluate the health of a classroom system by examining the number and percent of students who have moved from one level of support to the next. Typical movement trajectories to be evaluated include the number and percent of students who have moved from intensive to strategic or benchmark or core, from strategic to core, but it's also necessary to examine the number and percent of students who remain at or above benchmark at that core level across our various steps. This report, in other words, is a tool that can be used by classroom teachers and grade level literacy teams to evaluate how well students at all levels of need are being supported to achieve the benchmark goal. This report includes the following information: the time of year being compared or evaluated, in this case the middle of second grade to the end of second grade, and the class in which students are enrolled, in this case from second grade. The report also identifies the need for support based on DIBELS and the personal preferences that you've set, either for the recommended goals or the former goals. For DIBELS 6, there's only one option available. The effectiveness of the intensive, strategic, and core programs in meeting the needs of each student are also identified. In this example, we have 9 students. At the top, it displays their middle of the school year score on DORF, or DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency, their end of year score on DORF, and their end level or need for support reached. And you can see that right here. And it says here we have 9 students in intensive at the middle of the year. At the bottom, we can see that in this example, the intensive program was ineffective in moving students to core or strategic support. 9 out of 9 students who were intensive at the middle of the year remained intensive at the end of the year. 0 out of 9 moved to strategic, 0 out of 9 moved to core. The strategic program was effective at moving 100% of students to a core level of support. We had 3 students at the strategic at middle of the year. Here are their scores on oral reading fluency at the middle, at the end, and the end level reached. At the bottom again, we can see the count and the percent of students. 0 out of 3 moved to intensive, 0 out of 3 stayed strategic, and 3 out of 3 moved up to core. So that can be considered a success. Now your turn. How many students were there at the middle of the year in core instruction? You should say 17, so you should see it right here at the top. You can find that information here or down at the bottom here. Now, the core program maintained 15 out of 17, or 88.2% of students at or above benchmark. But in this case, 2 students lost ground and moved back to strategic support after being in only core support. So that's the summary of effectiveness by class report. Now let's look at the summary of effectiveness at the school level. The Summary of Effectiveness by School report provides a more global perspective about the health of a school system in supporting all students in their achievement of benchmark goals. Similar to the Summary of Effectiveness report by class, this report helps educators examine how effective their intensive, strategic, and core programs have been at meeting the needs of students by summarizing the number and percent of students who have moved from one level of support to the next. Again, typical movement trajectories to be evaluated include the number and percent of students who have moved from intensive to below strategic or core, from strategic to core. And then again, we want to look at the number of students and percent of students who remain at or above benchmark across our 2 points in time. Whereas the Summary of Effectiveness by class allows educators to see the movement of individual students, this report allows you to see the effectiveness of the intensive, strategic, and core programs at moving students towards the benchmark goal at both the school level and the classroom level. At the top again, we have our identifying information that helps to orient us to this report. We are now looking at the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year for second grade in the Teaching and Learning Elementary School. Along the left hand of the report, you can see that at the top row we have the information for our entire school building, and in the subsequent rows we have the information for each individual teacher's classroom within that school and that grade level. Similar to the class list report, our students are broken up into 3 columns focusing on where they started at the beginning of the step. For us, it's the beginning of second grade. So we have first our intensive students, started the year at intensive, students who started the year at strategic, and students who started the year at core support for the entire grade level at that top row. I've cut off part of the screen here so that we can focus in and read that small print a little better. First, you'll see the name of the school, and you'll see the labels for each row. First is count, or the number of students, the percent of benchmark status on DORF for that category, and then the percent of total students represented there. Let's look at the intensive to show you how to read this report. In this first column, we have those students listed that were likely to need intensive support at the beginning of the year. And then they're categorized into 3 groups from that initial group. Those students that were ending the year at intensive, those students that ended the year at strategic, and those students that ended the year at core support. You can also see here that we had 48 students who were intensive at the beginning of second grade. That represented 41.4% of our total students. Out of the 48 students, 43 of those students remained intensive. That represents 89.6% of all the students in the intensive category, and it represents 37.1% of the students overall across the grade level across our school building. Similarly, 4 students moved up to strategic who started the year at intensive. That represents 8.3% of students within this category, and 3.4% of the total group of students, and so on. Let's look at the next category, those students who are likely to need strategic support at the beginning of the year who move to intensive. Sadly, we do see that there are 2 out of the 20 students who move down to intensive. This represents 10% of all the 20 students in this group and 1.7% of all the students across the grade level. Out of the 20 students who started the year at strategic, 8 students remained strategic, or 40%. Out of the 20 students who started the year at strategic, 10 students actually moved up to core. So again, a success. The school would be proud that they were able to successfully move these students up to core support. That represents 50% of the students in this category and 8.6% of the grade overall. Next, we'll look at those students who started the year as likely to need core support. Of the 48 students who started the year at benchmark, we can see that none of them slipped through the cracks and went down to intensive. So that's a big relief, and people can feel, the teachers at this school can feel confident that they didn't lose any core students to the intensive level. Now, out of the 48 students, however, 4 students did end the year at strategic, so they did lose ground. This represents 8.3% of all the students in this category and 3.4% of the students in this grade level overall. Now, successfully, we can see the success here in this grade level. 44 out of 48 students started the year at benchmark, ended the year at benchmark. So that represents 91.7% of all the students in this category and 37.9% of the students across the grade level. The final column here represents the benchmark status on oral reading fluency in end of second grade, and it simply provides the totals. So across this report, we have 116 students, and 38.8% were intensive, 13.8% are strategic, and 47.4% are core. These numbers might look a little bit different than the numbers you receive from a histogram or a summary report because they only represent those students who have data for our 2 time points, in this case, beginning and end of the year. You continue to read this report by simply looking down the columns. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 classrooms here, and all of these students are, from the top row, are represented in these classrooms, so that at the grade level, the school can plan together and look at which classrooms were successful in maintaining their students at the core support, were successful at moving students from strategic up to core support, and who were also successful in moving those students from intensive up to strategic or core. So this grade level might look at this report and they would say, well, out of the 48 students who began the year in intensive, 43 of them remain, 89.6%. Of the 20 students who started the year in strategic, 8 of them stayed strategic, and 2 students dropped to intensive. 10 moved up, so that's a positive. Of the 48 students who started at benchmark, 44 of them stayed in benchmark, 91.7%. Now, another way to think about this is trying to identify which students made adequate progress. So if I add, in this case, 8.3 plus 2.1, that equals 10.4. So 10.4 of students who started the year as likely to need intensive support made adequate progress. 50% of students who started the year as likely to need strategic support made adequate progress. And 91.7% of students who started the year as likely to need core support also made adequate progress. Another way to look at this is to add up the numbers across the grade level. If I add 3.4 to 0.9 to 8.6 to 37.9, then that gives me a total of 50.8% of students made adequate progress across the grade level. Of course, this grade level would have to evaluate whether that was an increase or decrease from last year. And also you'd have to evaluate where your goals are and if this met your goals. In most cases, only having 50% of your students make adequate progress is not enough. And so this grade level would want to do some searching to figure out what could they do differently in their instruction to get more students making adequate progress. They would use this information in collaboration with the other information to come to a conclusion. They might say, our system is working for half of the students in strategic, for most students receiving our core supports, but it's not working so well for students receiving intensive support. We see the least amount of effectiveness for the intensive support. Let's prioritize that group and make an action plan. Now, here's the summary of effectiveness for the district level. This should look exactly like the summary of effectiveness for the school level. The difference is at the top row is the school district, so all first graders in this case across the entire school district, and then we have our 3 schools listed below. This way, district level administrators can evaluate which schools are being highly effective with their students and which schools might need additional professional development. If we take a quick look, we can see that if we take a quick look at the likely to need intensive support at beginning of the year, we see that 71 students were intensive at the beginning of first grade, or 40% of all students across the entire school district. We can see that within each school, we had 40% at our first school, 57.7% of students were intensive at our second school, and 34.5% of students were intensive at our third school. School B is a small school, but they did a very effective job with moving students from intensive to strategic or core support. You can see that all students moved out of intensive, whereas our other 2 schools also had some great successes, but still had some students remaining in the intensive category. Similarly, if we look at our students in the likely to need core support, we can see that overall we had 83 students who started the year at the core support, and of those students across the district, 59 of them remained at core. 21 fell down back to strategic, and 3 moved all the way down to core. Now, if we look at our individual school data, we can see that our first school had 27 students at core at the beginning of the year, and 21 of those students remained at core. Our second school had 8 students. Our small school had 8 students who started the year at core, and 6 remained at core. And finally, our last school, 48 students started the year at core, and 32 students remained at core. If we look at our percentages, we can see how each of these schools did at maintaining their students at core support. So this information, looking at the district level as well as individual school level data, can be used to allocate resources across the district. And this includes professional development support for teachers and for principals. So with the summary of effectiveness reports, data teams can answer the question, how well is our instruction meeting the needs of our students? This can be accomplished by determining how many students move from intensive to strategic support, determining how many students move from strategic to core support, also thinking about how many students remain in core support, and determining where student growth is less evident. This information can be used in the action planning process. We always want to remember that we want to use the problem-solving process throughout the school year. Remember that at the beginning of the year, we are generally asking how many of our students need different levels of support. We're providing different opportunities for grouping students into their instructional environments that suits them best. At the middle of the year, we're checking on the plan, and this is the first time that you can use the summary of effectiveness report at the middle of the year. And then at the end of the year, we're mostly evaluating the plan. And this is a great time for all of you to look at the summary of effectiveness report. With that, thank you very much. Please feel free to continue to send us questions, and we will answer those questions to you privately. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. We appreciate your feedback and the work that you do in the schools. Have a great day.